was listening to a YouTube piece. Was an interview of Jordan Peterson, and he was being asked comments, making comments about work of Ayn Rand and specifically Atlas Shrugged. And one of the things that he said about the characters, he didn't think that they were, I guess, in literary sense, that they were too one-dimensional, not conflicted like regular characters might be. So I guess the question, to be succinct, is do you think that they are moving, some of the main characters are, certainly John Galt is in this morally perfect state, and so that makes him appear to someone who doesn't quite understand what that's about as one-dimensional?
I think there's an element of that. I think there's much more going on when someone thinks of it as one-dimensional. But I do think, and of thinking of Ayn Rand's purpose, of what she's her aesthetic purpose and what she's writing, is she's trying to portray the ideal, an ideal man or a new moral ideal. Crucial to that moral ideal is that life does not have to be racked by inner conflict. So it's not true of even so, and I think of this as the two. So the hero of the Fountainhead, Roark, is not plagued by inner conflict, and the hero of Atlas Shrugged, Galt, is not plagued by inner conflict. And I think that's important in her portrayal. That's what you're trying to achieve, and it's achievable. So it's the kind of portrait that of man metaphysically, as that he's inherently conflicted, and again, it's inner conflict. She's rejecting that. But it's a common, widespread view. Again, it comes from, it's a philosophical view, and since most philosophies split the world into two and say that a human being is in some sense split between this world and the next, and if one thinks, as Ayn Rand puts it, that religion has had a near monopoly in ethics, there's reasons philosophically why there would be this widespread view that inner conflict is the norm in human life. And she's rejecting that. And it's rejected in Roark, and it's rejected in Galt. It doesn't mean they don't have conflicts. I mean, Roark has all kinds of conflicts throughout the whole novel. Obviously there's a conflict in a sense with society that's rejecting him and his views and his ideals, but he's in conflict with Dominique. He's in conflict with Winan. The same with Galt. He's in conflict with as one way to put it, with the strikers, primarily with Reardon, and even more. Obviously, even much more so with Dagny. In a way, that's the central conflict. Is the conflict between Galt and Dagny in Atlas Shrugged. So it's not that they don't have conflicts, but so it's when it's put like it's the issue of inner conflict. But it's not as though her novels don't have inner conflict. And I think they're some of the deepest inner conflicts in literature. And if you take Reardon and Stadler as two different kinds of inner conflicts in Atlas Shrugged, if you take I think Winan is one of the deepest characterizations of a person who's conflicted and who experiences life as inner conflict. If you take in Anthem, it's written from the first person, but the whole story is about his inner conflict. But she has then a perspective on what inner conflict looks like. And if you're to understand it in its deepest way, and you're to dramatize it in literature, and that's part of that, she's in the Romantic school. So part of what's going on is if you're reading it and expecting naturalism, and what you meet with is romanticism in its approach to thinking about life and human characterization and how to characterize that, they're gonna be unrealistic, because there is a sense in which that it's not slice of life. So, and if you take a Peterson, like, these aren't the people I meet in my practice when I was counseling people and so on. Yeah, that's true. It's not true that you don't meet the kind of conflict that she's dramatizing, but you need to be able to work to get what this conflict is and how it would then play out in regard to more, however you want to put it, more statistically average people. So there's a lot of, I think, complex things going on in regard to the aesthetics as well, of why a Peterson could have that kind of reaction, that they're one-dimensional, because they're not one-dimensional, but they're operating in different dimensions than that he's used to. But I'll put one last thing, this again more on the aesthetics, but it's important to get. You can have the same experience of finding something one-dimensional, of reading things that are not actually one-dimensional, but that you disagree with. And you get the sense, well, it's the same thing over and over. And it's the same in the fundamental. It's not the same in its details and derivatives. But if you're not interested in the details and derivatives, you can experience it as it's the same thing over and over. So if you've ever read Marxists, or even if you read Marx, you can read him, and I'm sympathetic to this, and it's the same damn thing over and over. Because if you get some of his fundamental premises, and if you're rejecting them, like, I don't think man is determined, and I certainly don't think he's determined by his economic forces, and all the intellectual stuff is a superstructure on that. But and it's that over and over again. And if you're rejecting all of that, then you can experience, like, I'm not interested in these details, and it's just the same thing over and over. The same thing happens with people reading Ayn Rand. If they're rejecting the fundamentals of the approach, you can read Atlas Shrugged and get, like, she's saying the same thing over and over. She's not saying the same thing over and over. It's, you get a deeper and deeper perspective on the same fundamentals. But if you're rejecting all those fundamentals, you're not interested in the you're not paying attention to the details. And you can then experience it emotionally as it's the same thing over and over. And it's that criticism is made so often that you really have to start to think, like, why is it made? Is it, and I think this is the reason of why it's made, and that you can get that you have the same, you, for other things, hopefully not towards Atlas Shrugged, that it's the same thing over and over, but towards other things, you can have that perspective when it's not literally true. And yet it feels like that. And there's a reason it feels like that.